Hello and welcome to the Be Better podcast, where we believe any and every area of your life has a little more potential that you can tap into to change the course and trajectory of your outcomes. My name is Clarissa Parody and I am your host, and I have worked and trained in the worlds of business strategy, leadership, and performance. And I am the person who believes in and creates success where there appears to be ceilings. And if that sounds like something that's in your world, your reality, and something you want more of, welcome to the show. It is a great day to change your life. Let's go. Hello, I'm so glad, Mick. It has been a minute. The first time I met you, I was like, this man, I need to have him on my podcast. And we're here. We're finally here. And I'm thrilled and honored that you agreed to join me on your Sunday afternoon and to share some of your experience and wisdom with us. So welcome.
Thanks. I appreciate the opportunity.
It's a lot of fun. And Mick got to see me navigate. I don't know what is happening, but my microphone isn't working. My keyboard's not working. I don't know what's happening, but thank you for your patience. And it just goes to show that you can still have agility, even when it's like, I swear to God, this normally works. I swear to God, it normally works. So Mick, I'd love to, one of the things when we first met, we met at a launch party for one of our mutual contacts. And we had a conversation. I'm pretty sure I ignored most of everyone else in that room because you were just so interesting to me. And you started telling me, and you're also so kind and warm, and you started telling me about some of your, like, how you grew up. And the first thought I had was, wow, people need to hear this. This is super powerful. So, I mean, maybe it doesn't feel powerful because you lived it, but for me, I was like, oh my gosh, this man. So how about we start at the beginning? Where were you born? Well, we can
sure.
Decade leaps.
Let's do that.
We'll do decade leaps. So we'll talk like born, where you born, and then what are some key moments that brought you here?
Sure. I was born in Soest, Germany. My father was in the Canadian military, and my mother is German and worked in some clerical job on the base. So yes, they met. They got married. I was born a year or so later. My dad got his release from the army, I think, just before I was born. He and my mom moved to London, England. My dad wanted to pursue graduate studies at University College in London. He wanted to study English. That's what his undergrad was. They were really struggling financially. My mom found work, but my dad was a full-time student. So they left me with my Oma, my mom's mom, and she raised me for a couple of years. Then what happened? We moved to Guelph, Ontario. My dad had been offered a job. I think it was just sort of a sessional position. It was founded as an agricultural school. There's a big vet college there, and this was in the late 60s. They'd created an arts faculty or humanities department. My dad decided he liked it. He took another year in England to get his PhD. I stayed with them. I stayed with my parents at that point because my dad was getting paid a little bit. My mom was still working, and my Oma came and lived with us to make sure I stayed in line. So that was my early childhood. So I did my first bit of elementary school in London, and then we moved to Guelph, and that's where I grew up.
Excellent. And then fast forward. So you grew up, I have one question. Did you ever learn to speak German? I know you speak a little bit, but was it ever a fluent language for you?
Yeah, it's still fluent.
Wow.
Yeah, it's my mother tongue. So it would never have occurred to me to speak anything but German to my Oma. She passed away 10 or 15 years ago, but all the growing up, we spoke German at home a lot.
Wow. Grandmas
Yeah.
are really special people, and it really says something about your family when your family can take on responsibilities or help each other out when situations get tough. That says a lot about the character of your family. And I think what a great group of people to grow up with, knowing that they were willing to extend themselves
Hmm.
when in need.
Yeah, and my grandmother just came from a tiny village in the Carpathian Mountains. So today it's southern Ukraine, but it's close to the border of Hungary and Czechoslovakia. So it's the border was fairly fluid for a long time. It's not a very significant part of the world. So the lines on the map just got changed from as history unfolded. But it was a predominantly German community there. Catherine the Great wanted to get parts of her country settled so that there'd be some output. In the same way that Western Canada got settled, people were offered some free land, and as long as they were able to get out there and clear some of it and build a house and get a certain amount under cultivation, they were given some more. So that's how we settled the West, and that's how this German community was created. So when World War II started, Hitler wanted to unify all the Germans. So all my Oma's, her husband, my Opa, my grandfather, and basically all the young men in the village were conscripted into the German army. The Russians hadn't really entered the war at that point, and yeah, that's what happened. And my grandfather never came back. A couple of her brothers died. Yeah, it was a really big convulsion for that part of the world, and she and my mom basically moved from refugee camp to refugee camp. So they stuck together and went through a lot together. So it was kind of natural that she stayed with us.
That's amazing. And I mean, what a crazy experience for her to have walked through.
Yeah.
I can't even I mean, obviously I can't imagine. I haven't even lived in a war-torn area, but
Yeah.
I the thought of not having any sort of stability and the thought of conscription and having no choice and
Hmm.
losing the people you love is just like without against their volition. Oh, it can rock me, and it's really not that far when the world was at war. There are
Yeah.
definitely areas right now that are under some war, but it's not like the whole world isn't necessarily involved in
Yeah.
those wars. And so that is quite the history to come from. So you end up in Guelph, and
Yeah.
then at some point you end up in Edmonton. So how did we get from Guelph to
Yeah.
Edmonton?
Well, there was a an intervening period where I was at university in Kingston, Ontario.
Okay.
I went to Royal Military College. After that, I went to I went reserve entry, so I wasn't obliged to serve in the Canadian Army afterward. I spent a year and a half kind of traipsing around in Europe, doing odd jobs and yeah, just sort of seeing the sights of the world. I guess maybe I inherited some nomad from my mom and my Oma. They had to move around a lot, and I felt compelled to see at least some of Europe. And I moved back home. I was at loose ends. Um, I had a very good friend who had moved to Edmonton and liked it, and he said, "Hey, if you come out here, I'm sure I can get you a job, with the construction company I'm working with." So um, I ended up here and met the right lady, and yes, here I remain.
Here you remain, and you're still with the right lady.
I am, yeah. It's
How long
been
has that been?
31 years.
31 years. That is incredible.
Yeah,
That is incredible.
Well, she's an incredible lady. I'm very blessed.
I would say that's one thing that's I would say from the people I've talked to that have had successful marriages or enduring marriages is that they often talk highly of their partners. You know, there's a lot of when you look at people who chirp their spouses, or sometimes what you see in movies, it's, you know, the complaints about like the ladies trying to get away from their husbands, like, oh, we need a girls' night, or the guy's like, oh, like my wife doesn't want me to play golf, and you go into all these things, and I'm like, you know, there's people who actually talk really highly about the people they date or
Mm,
marry, and then they say that they're blessed to be with them, and I'm like, that takes a certain perspective and a certain person. Well, I guess it takes two people, at least in
mm.
that relationship, to have that happen. What do you think makes that relationship successful?
Oh boy, that's I think a lot of things. um, we have a lot of fun together. We laugh together a lot. I think that's vital. Um, we uh, we talk a lot. We just my son got married last weekend, as I mentioned, in Victoria. So we drove out. So we had a you know, we had a long road trip, but you know, we still like each other's company. We still have good conversations together, and I think part of it is we both challenge ourselves professionally. We're not, we're evolving as professionals, so there's that gives us plenty to talk about for sure. She's a better talker than I am. I'm afraid you got the wrong partner on your podcast, but yeah, and we've got 3 kids who are making their way in the world, so they give us plenty to talk about as well.
Excellent. Well, it really sounds like you guys are really great friends.
We are.
And I think that is, I mean, for those, I've got a lot of listeners who are younger and maybe are still in dating, and chemistry and attraction is one thing, but that enduring connection and that friendship is just so powerful. It's
Yeah,
just so
and I
powerful.
wish I could offer advice in, what do you look for, but I don't know. I just feel like it was dumb luck for me.
Maybe I always offer to people that have that it's really sweet that you attribute it to luck, but I look at how many people, the choices they make and the risks they take and the way they behave and the things that they do and the way that they grow, and I'm like, you think life isn't, I don't know if life is that accidental, like, or it can be, but the series of choices led you to be in that circumstance that allowed you to have a dumb enough luck that you got to meet her. And so I think, you know, you can call it luck, and there might be a little bit about some of the choices you made that had you be in the right places with the right people.
Okay.
Just say thank you. Yeah. Well, if you think about it, like how many times, I mean, when I was growing up, my parents like, make sure you're hanging around with the right crowd. I was a goody two shoes. Like it did not matter. I was afraid to get in trouble. I was afraid every time I got called into the principal's office several times, but for like good things, like scholarships and stuff. But every time I was like, did I do something wrong? Am I hanging out with the wrong, quote unquote, wrong kinds of people? And, you know, it's not like your friend brought you out here, was like, I think you could have a great job here. I could get you into construction. And you don't just, at least for me, I don't offer that to anyone. I offer it to people that I know will work hard and do great
Okay.
things. And so it sounds like you did a lot to get you in the right spaces, even if it wasn't on purpose, if it's just maybe who you are. I also love that you said that you, uh, inside your relationship, you separately have ways of challenging and growing yourselves as professionals. And I think if you're not challenging yourself, if you're not, whether it's in your career or anywhere, if you're not growing, you're probably dying. And so why not pursue growth? And I don't necessarily mean dying as in mortality, but the death of your soul or your spirit or your fire can really take a hit if you're not, you know, getting to see like who you really are. You don't get to meet you if you don't make those decisions. Okay, so you have 3 kids. You get your first foray into construction, and then your career in construction just kind of explodes, and you've touched so many different areas of that industry and the business with real estate and development. Let's talk a little bit about that. So,
Sure.
what's your
You know,
first job? What happened?
well, my first construction job, actually, I was 15. It was just you know, summer holidays in high school, and I got a job as a laborer on a framing crew. and it's kind of it came and went out of my life a few times. I did some construction work when I lived in Spain and in France. Um, so it was always something I gravitated to. I'm just fascinated by the process of creation. Um, I my mom has a fine arts degree. My my dad was was an English professor. He's an emeritus now, but so there was always this, I guess, undercurrent of art in my upbringing. Yeah, and it took various forms, visual and certainly the literature. So it yeah, it really felt like an artistic outlet for me, and it still does. I still am thrilled that over the span of a week, something useful and enduring has been created, and I love playing a role in that. So over the last 10 or 12 years, I suppose, I've been involved in building infill in Edmonton. So that means I'm building new houses and hopefully new buildings in mature neighborhoods. So these are neighborhoods built in the created and developed in the 40s, 50s, 60s, and now they're changing. The housing stock is aging, and the market has changed, and cities are a complicated organism that generally continues to grow. There's plenty of historical examples of cities that have died out, but um, for the rest of my lifetime and probably your lifetime, Edmonton will continue to grow. And it's a cool place, and I think it offers opportunities and challenges. I think like any city, I think Edmontonians aren't proud enough of the city they live in. I think we're actually an extraordinary place, and I'm really proud of Edmonton, and it's not perfect, and I don't think any city is, but it's pretty great.
What makes you proud about Edmonton?
Edmonton is cool without trying to be cool. So sort of geographically, our geographic role is interesting within Canada. We're the most northerly city of, 1 million plus people in North America. I don't know if you've ever looked at a population map, but 80% of Canada's, I heard this from former Mayor Don Iveson, I didn't realize this, but 80% of Canada's population lives within about 200 kilometers of the US border, right? It's a thin strip of of population density along that 49th parallel and south in Ontario and Quebec. Of the 20% who don't live in that thin strip, 80% live in Edmonton and Greater Edmonton. So, and of the 20% of Canada that doesn't live in the thin strip or in the Edmonton area, 80% of them are service from Edmonton. So, we're kind of a pivotal spot within our country. As a city, we've got an extraordinary art scene. We've really embraced the notion that we've got to cope with the growth that we're seeing. So Edmonton is going to, if current trends continue and they show every sign of doing so, we'll have 2 million people living here by 2044. So we're, as a city, getting ahead of that and figuring out where we're going to put them all. So Unlike most North American cities, we've created an urban boundary. So we've said, this is it. This is our footprint. This is the boundary of our city. We're not going to grow anymore. We're not going to take over any more farmland. We are going to try to fit 50% of the people that move here over the next few decades into our existing neighborhoods. So, infill is going to become a more and more important thing in Edmonton. So we need to figure out how we're going to get it done without upsetting people who have lived in these neighborhoods for decades and are maybe not eager to see them change.
I think change can be, if you're not ready for it, or if it feels like it's going to disrupt, hurt, or harm you in any way, or make you feel safe or unsafe or uncomfortable, I think the resistance to change can be just massive. And
well, you think as a species, we've kind of evolved that way, right? That rustling in the bushes, is it a squirrel or is it a tiger? Our default mode to stay alive is it's got to be a tiger, run for it, right? Well, let's not just hang around and see if it's actually a squirrel. So
better safe than sorry, let's
right.
run.
So yes, we tend, I think, to panic when we see something we don't recognize and are not ready for. And I think it's important to acknowledge that that's sort of a reaction that's been bred into us over hundreds of generations.
Totally. Yeah, that is powerful. It makes me wonder what, like, since your primary world is the world of infill, what are the things that, I know it's kind of transitioned and changed since you began. Where did you start with infill? What were the original reactions, and how is it now in comparison?
It's really cool, and I started a company called Singletree Builders in 2012. I had a friend who had a lot in the university area. So I built a house for him and his family. And I'd been interested in infill for a while. I lived in mature neighborhoods the whole time I've been in Edmonton. My wife grew up in the West End. Our first house was actually in Forest Heights because I thought it would be good to keep her huge, energetic, noisy family at arm's length. But as soon as we had our first baby, that was we changed our minds about that. Yeah. So yeah, I've liked mature neighborhoods. They kind of remind me of the place I grew up in, Guelph, where the streets are lined with big trees and the lots are a little bigger. And Europe was like that too, right? That streetscape is really important. I spent a lot of my career building in the suburbs, and there's really no tree cover. It's clearly built for cars, and I just think it doesn't. Those neighborhoods don't have the same charm. So to me, it's an aesthetic choice. It's what appeals to me. So yeah, now these neighborhoods are close to downtown. We've realized as a global society that we drive too much. That creates a lot of environmental problems. So how do we figure out how to drive less? This whole notion of the 15-minute neighborhood, right? You should be able to go to a park and a school and buy a beer or a coffee and pick up some groceries in a 15-minute walk or bike ride from your house. And to be fair, the developers of these neighborhoods in the 50s had that idea as well, but there just wasn't enough density to sustain many businesses. So this is an experiment. Our city is an ongoing experiment, and now we're thinking about how we can get more density in these neighborhoods, hopefully to sustain local businesses that we're trying to encourage, and also to make our city viable. You know, it's we need more taxpayers per acre to pay the bills.
Everything's going up. Everything
Yeah.
is growing up. And what I also wanted to tie into with your 15-minute neighborhood, when I was doing my master's, we had this study that we got to read about quality of life. Like, how are you improving your employees' quality of life? And one of the numbers was, if you live within 15 minutes of your workplace, or maybe it's 20, it was an increase of like $20,000 to $40,000 a year of quality of life, not necessarily the financial impact, but the quality of life is it's as if, depending on the city, you've earned $20,000 to $40,000 more. And I thought, wow, I live really far away from work.
Oh, do you?
Well, I chose that for a variety of reasons, but it was just like, that is something, if people know, would they choose to live differently?
Well, we're seeing it played out here, right? You know, I've built quite a few so-called skinny houses where I buy a lot and demolish the house and subdivide, and put two houses where there was one. And by far the biggest cost to that is the land. So when you compare what you get in a skinny house, you pay $700,000 or so, $800,000 for a narrow house, on a 25-foot wide lot, in a neighborhood that's closer in, and you compare that to what you get for that kind of money in the far-flung suburbs. You get a lot more house and probably a lot more land, but you also get a lot more commute. You get a lot less interesting things to walk or ride your bike to in 15 minutes. So it's tough to quantify, and people have to make up their own minds. But there continue to be lots of skinny houses getting built. So it's still a market. Yeah, I mean, Edmonton has, there was a goal of 25% of our building permits being issued for infill infill projects, and we hit it a couple of, I guess it was 4 or 5 years ago, but I think that was kind of fake news because it coincided with a real downturn in what was happening in the new subdivisions. They had a big drop in sales, but yeah, in the last year or so, we've been hitting that 25%.
Wow.
So yeah, so there's been an awakening in Edmonton, and my projects, there are often people in the neighborhood who are against it, right? They view their neighborhood as perfect, and any change must therefore be negative, and a lot of times they just don't understand, right? I'm building something for another family to move in, and it'll be, another family will have the experience that they had moving in a new house in this neighborhood. And I take them for a tour of the house when they come by, and many of these people are retired and they're curious and a little nervous, and yeah, very often after a few conversations, they say, "Hey, what do you think? What do you think you'd want to buy my house for?"
Oh my goodness, you can turn the tables. It just goes to show that enrollment and conversation can really soften and also provide like insight and information to what's going on. Because what I know, my brother-in-law used to live in Forest Terrace Heights, Capilano area. Fulton Place is the specific. There we go.
Right.
And it's just recently starting to get permits, and people are building houses. Some people are subdividing lots. Some people are just building massive 3,500 square foot homes.
Mm-hmm.
And there can be an us versus them situation that happens, like when he was renovating. He just took an old bungalow from like the original shell of the home, and he hired people who were experts who gave him great advice, and he hired the right contractors. And the amount of people that called on his renovation of his bungalow that was maintaining its existing structure was insane. They actually had an investigation by police because they thought it was like essentially a drug house or whatever, and because people were in and out. And he's like, that's called demolition.
Wow.
It's just, but people get very the unknown can be very frightening, especially when it's close to home or is by your home.
Yeah.
And now everyone in the neighborhood is either renovating or subdividing or doing something to create some beautification in a neighborhood that was a little slow to turn into that makeover stage.
Yeah, and it's part of the deal, the infill construction. I think residential construction in general, I really like it because people are emotionally invested in what you're building for them. And that can be good news and bad news. The the hardwood flooring that they picked suddenly, gets delayed a couple of months. They get upset. If you're building someone a donut shop, they're just grumpy about how long it takes and how much it costs, right? They don't give you a hug when it's all done. So yeah, I like that emotional investment in residential projects.
That's so, I think it's really powerful. I have been in real estate now for, I don't even know, 12 years.
Mhm.
And I've done everything from commercial to like medium density multifam to high density multifam to single density or to like single family. And so I get to see the spectrum. And I think it's the single biggest purchase most people will ever make. I mean, there are other people who will buy other things, but for the most part, your $800,000, $500,000, $300,000 home is quite possibly the largest purchase you are ever going to make. And it's not that you're just going there to lay your head.
Mm-hmm.
It's where you're going every day. It's going to be your respite, your reprieve, where you raise your family or your fur babies or whatever. And so there is so much more to it, and it can be such a sensitive and also such a celebratory experience.
Yeah.
I have questions about infills. So I live in suburbia. There's an HOA. It's a cookie cutter. I know exactly when I transition to a new developer's area of the subdivision, based on architectural rules, standards, whatever
So-called
they are.
controls. Yeah.
So-called controls. And like what I can really appreciate about my neighborhood is that, there's someone looking after the community, like there's someone watching, so that if someone's fence doesn't get painted, someone says something. And it's done. But what I don't love about my neighborhood is that I could turn right twice and not know I'm on a different street.
Yeah.
And what I love about infill neighborhoods is that they don't necessarily have HOAs, and you get these beautiful streetscapes, as you had mentioned, with the massive trees and the boulevards and the parks that are nearby. They're developed in the communities that have actual ice rinks, and there's variety when you walk.
Yeah.
And so I'm just curious, you said you love infill, and like that's what I love about infill. I'd love to hear more about your thoughts about what you love about infill.
Yeah, I love the architectural variety. And there's plenty of negative talk about, how you're destroying the character of the neighborhood. And I don't even know what that means. I've asked many people, how can you quantify the character of the neighborhood? And that includes, people in the planning department at the city. And what I get back is mature trees and walkable streets, and I don't want to change any of that. I value that at least as much as other people. That's why I want to build in these neighborhoods. So I don't think the character of a neighborhood is really anything to do with houses. I also think that it changes over time, right? how much of the character of the neighborhood is related to the people who live in it. My neighborhood of Grosvenor, its character has changed a great deal since the 60s and 70s when it was full of young families. Our um, the population of school age children in our neighborhood is probably 50% of what it was in the 70s. And in other neighborhoods it's worse, and the city's closing the schools. So that's horrible, right?
Yeah.
What happens to a neighborhood after you close the local school, the local elementary school? So we need to think carefully about um, what we're doing to keep our neighborhoods alive and viable. Um, we need to find ways to encourage young families to move in, and that's sort of the next chapter of infill, I think, in Edmonton is the so-called missing middle. I don't know if you're familiar with that term, but and it's true of most cities in North America. We've got so many neighborhoods, the first ring suburbs, the suburbs that are close to downtown, and they're almost all single family houses, and maybe there's a high rise on a busy corner, but that's kind of it for variety. There's very little in terms of row housing or low rise condo type buildings. There are some in some areas, but they're pretty old and dilapidated now. So as I said earlier, the most expensive ingredient to infill is the land. So if we're going to find ways to move young families and new Canadians into these neighborhoods, just to create a durable social fabric, by having a cross section of people, we need to create different build forms to accommodate them. So and it also relates to number of taxpayers per acre to hopefully pay into replacing roads and street lights and school renovations and all the other things that need to happen to these neighborhoods that have been around for 50 years and are starting to see some of that hard infrastructure need replacing and upgrading.
I also love the idea when you have that diversity in a neighborhood, you can essentially live in that community your whole life. And I can speak for my grandparents who have now passed, but their commitment was to try to stay in the same area so that they could see their friends. So
Yeah.
as their lives grew, evolved, and changed, they didn't necessarily want to leave. And at one point, my grandparents hit the age where most of their friends in their neighborhood had passed, and their next location they chose to live was close to where family was. So what decided for them their location was proximity to people they care about. And if we focused on communities and creating a space where you could be in connection with real life, live people, people in the streets, people that you, Mr. Rogers, the people that you meet each day, I'm like that. What difference could that make? We had a family lake lot, and when you're driving in, people would always wave. You wave at someone in my beautiful suburban neighborhood. People are like, well, why are you waving at me? And I'm like, that we could really shift the culture of how neighborhoods are if you had consistency and exposure. Because what we know from a psychological perspective is exposure often leads to familiarity, and familiarity often leads to feeling like you like and or appreciate something. And that's why we have nostalgia too. So we can often glorify things from the past that maybe weren't that great, but we're like, oh, we have sentiment around it. So that's really fascinating to me.
There was a political campaign focused on that very idea not so long ago, south of the border. Yeah, you may have heard about that.
I feel like I try to keep my nose out of politics and into neuroscience.
Okay. Well, you've probably heard about Make America Great Again, right?
Oh, I did. I can't avoid that one. That's everywhere.
this artificial nostalgia that it was never really defined, but it sure got a lot of buy-in.
You know what I will say? If you're going to do anything, whether you want to divide or unify a community, if you center it on emotion, you will successfully achieve your objective. And so it's like, really, how are you going to use that? And so much like when we talked earlier about infills, like people are like, oh, like I don't like that change in my neighborhood. We want to keep this neighborhood the way it was. It was so good. Do you remember the 50s and 60s when we were growing up our kids, we're raising our children? And it's like, well, that was great, but you now have potholes every 5 inches.
Yeah.
So
And
we
those
need to do
kids,
something about that.
those kids you raise live on the, you know, live in the new subdivisions because they can't afford to buy a house here, and they don't want to
Mhm.
buy a 1950s house and try and renovate it because
Those
they're
are old
busy.
pipes.
Yeah, they're
Those are
busy.
really old pipes.
Yeah.
I think like when I think about my home buying experience, and at the time I was 28 and I had a little nest egg saved, and I in my mind the absolute right decision was to buy a home. I mean, I don't know if I'd replicate that decision now. I'd probably invest in an Airbnb now that I know what I know. But at the time that wasn't a thing. So, or it wasn't nearly as popular as it is now. But when I went to buy my home, there was a couple things that had to happen. Is I had to be able to afford it, and it also had to afford me the kind of lifestyle I wanted, which
Right.
for me, I really value being outside. I value being in nature. And Mick, you're going to love this, nostalgically from a childhood, when I remember my grandpa uh, taking us out in his Thunderbird, and
Okay.
we drive on country roads that were just outside, because at that time New McLeod was being developed in
Okay.
Edmonton, and there's all these country roads, and I was like, I just want to be near country roads. And
Huh.
so I stepped into this home, which is the home I'm currently in. I was like, it has a west facing backyard, perfect. And then I just kind of explored the neighborhood. I was like, there's country roads, like a 3-minute walk. And
Oh.
so my decision was largely nostalgic, possibly not the best financial decision I've made, but it was the decision that I
How
made.
long have you lived there?
So long. It's so crazy. 8 years.
Oh, okay. So you must like it. You wouldn't
I
move by
well,
now.
uh I can tell you, if I ever move, I am just paying someone to do all of it for me. I absolutely cannot handle moving. So I will do a lot to not move. That being said, um, since I have moved, so much of my family has moved to the West End. And so everyone is less than 10 minutes from me for the most part,
Okay.
which is a huge incentive, much like that aging in place thing that we talked about. I can
Yeah.
really see myself staying longer now because
Yeah.
everything I love is right here, which is really
Yeah.
cool.
You know, and that aging in place thing is another element, I think, of the missing middle. You know, the infill that we want to see. You know, what happens to people who have, you know, raised their kids and they've lived in the same house for 30 or 40 years, and now, you know, circumstances have changed. You know, maybe they're retired and they spend 6 months a year in Palm Springs. You know, do they really want to have a house in
Maybe they're
Edmonton?
done with shoveling snow. They're like,
Right.
this
You know,
had enough.
maybe they've got, you know, new knees, and you know, they can't push a lawnmower or a snow shovel the way they used to, and you know, it's not something they enjoy anymore. So, you know, can we not build them, you know, a place in a building where they don't have to do that, but they can still be in the neighborhood that, you know, where they know where they know people, and they know where the stores are, and they know how to get around. You know, I don't like the idea of packing them all together in some large facility, and I don't think I'd like that. My parents don't want to do that. They're in their 80s, and it would be easier on me if they did. Um, but I don't blame them for not wanting to.
I really don't either. That's why I look at like even some neighborhoods. There's some just outside of Laurier. There's a retirement and a primary care facility
Yeah,
called
Canterbury
Canterbury
Court.
Court. Yeah.
Yeah,
And I'm thinking, wow, what a clever way of taking a beautiful neighborhood with easy access to downtown, all these resources and amenities, close to medical, close to all these things that you need as a person most of the time, and especially as you near end of life. And how much more of, I think, ease and proximity really just drive quality of life in so many ways. When you have access to resources, it's easy to get there. You are just more likely to have a very high or higher quality of life. Granted, if you're in primary care, your life is probably not exactly where it used to be at one point, but why not take away as many barriers as possible?
Well,
And
the other interesting thing about Canterbury Court, and I don't know if there's anything to this, but it's right across the street from an elementary school, and there's a little daycare right by there. So, I've heard of developments where they've got seniors in the same building as a daycare, and they come down and hang out with the little kids, and everybody wins, right? The seniors get to help, and they get to be around these cute little kids who now have this sort of surrogate grandma or grandpa that they hang out with, a couple of days a week. So uh, yeah, I think it's a fantastic idea. And I've done a little bit of reading about the blue zones. Do you know about the blue zones
where people have longevity?
Yeah,
Yeah.
and
Please share.
there's some common threads, they stay close to their family. So there's, this sort of multi-generational living, the way that, you were describing with your grandparents being close by, and these people are useful, right? Into their, right to the end of their life, right? They're helping out in the garden, and they're helping raise the kids and taking them to, picking them up at school, and they're active. It keeps them active physically. So it ticks so many boxes, right? So I think this this inclination we had, or this experiment of trying to segregate everything in our cities. So we keep the old people over here, and we keep the shopping over there, and we keep the education in this corner, and you can't really do anything without getting into your car.
Yeah. And there's a danger with compartmentalizing life, because this is one thing I talk often about with my team is that, we talk about work-life balance, but the truth, I don't know if that exists, because it's still me. Whether I have something that goes wrong at home or something that goes wrong at the office, I often can't cut it off. Like not just psychologically, but at a chemical level in your body. If you're stressed out in one area, you step inside of a new door, it's not like that chemical response in your body stops. That's not what happens. And so if we start seeing that you're a human for what it is, which is a community-based organism, I think we approach things a little differently. And I was listening to a podcast yesterday, and it was a doctor who he started his own research lab, and he was talking with some of the research he was doing. And what he said really resonated with this conversation. It's nature does not create waste. There's nothing that we do. Like, nature is so good at not being wasteful that everything has a purpose. Like, even when leaves decay, there's a purpose. And so for me, I realize there's a lot in life right now that has even longevity happen in a different way for us. I know that there's advancements. I know there's technology. I know all of that. And nature doesn't create waste. So just because we have access to longevity, which there's evidence that there's other times in human history where we did have longevity, just depending on the environment. If we stop seeing people who are, I don't know, retired in their 80s as like, they're just let them drift off or fade into the sunset. Let them just sit and enjoy life. They can sit and enjoy life, but they can sit and enjoy life and have tea with the kindergartners. There's no such thing as a waste of life. If it's still living, it's still purposeful. So why not integrate it? Why do we need to separate everything? It's a very reductionist approach, and you can't take out a kidney and think your body's going to work the same way. So why don't we look at communities, families, how we plan our cities in the same way? Because it's just a magnification of us in a lot of ways.
Yeah, that's great.
It's just my thought from listening to a medical podcast yesterday. The things I do in my spare time. I'm currently having a little master bedroom makeover in my primary suite, and I'm doing everything just interior designers would tell you not to. So I have podcasts on to keep me going, and that was what I learned yesterday. So for those of you wondering, I painted a wall black. We're gonna see how I feel about it in 3 weeks. But right now it feels cool. Feels nifty.
All right.
Excellent. Okay, so I want to go back to some of the. I love that we had all this conversation. That was really exciting for me. I do have some questions about things that really defined your life? Like you have had some growth, you started your own company, you're now working for someone else again, you've had some shifts in and out. What do you think were some of your like key critical moments of definition in your life that you're like, that changed everything for me?
Boy, as a young person, I think going to Royal Military College changed a lot of things for me. Um, it was really my first introduction to the concept of servant leadership. Um, the the Canadian military, and I think probably militaries everywhere, put a very strong focus on leadership. Um, because it's kind of an acknowledgement that you're going to be putting people in really adverse circumstances, and you need them to do what they have to do. And you can't, you can't put a price tag on it. You can't say, I'll pay you, X number of dollars more if you take that hill, storm that position. So yeah, you need to create a bond between the people in the unit so that they all acknowledge a shared goal and are willing to make sacrifices if they need to. So it's really powerful, and I've never forgotten it, and it definitely had an impact on the way I view the world, and on the way I try to create the environment I work in. So that was definitely pivotal for me. I lived in Europe for a year and a half, just on my own, doing whatever kind of came my way, whatever I needed to do to to buy groceries or put a roof over my head, and it was a really great exercise in self-reliance. I'm fortunate to be good at languages. I think when you're a little kid and you get wired for a second language, it's easier to learn others. So I spoke pretty decent French when I just through high school, and the military is big on teaching officers French, so I got French training at RMC as well. So yeah, I spoke good French, and I could, I figured out how to get a job and find an apartment and so on. But that was after I lived in Spain, and I didn't speak any Spanish, but fortunately it's similar in structure to French, and I bought a dictionary and the newspaper, and I'd go through it and try and figure it out. And then I bought a grammar book, and it came to me, with a bit of effort and practice and some willingness to take risks and speak to Spanish people, and and I still bust it out today when I can. There's a lot of Spanish speaking people in the trades, French speaking people too. So yeah, I love that. I learned a lot about myself, and I learned a lot about, I think, humans. we're not all that different. They're we all care about the same big things, not necessarily the same little things, but yeah, that was good. That was another valuable element of RMC. I was thrown together with people from all over Canada. I don't think I'd ever met anyone from Newfoundland until I ended up, having a roommate from there in basic training. So, reflecting back, it's, I think, perhaps an argument for conscription. Germany did it for years, right? You had to serve. France did too. Up until probably the 90s, they stopped doing it. But as a young person, you had an obligation to serve in uniform or in some kind of administrative role if you were, if your conscience prohibited you from military service. But we live in a vast and varied country, and if you go to France, you'll find that the people in the south don't totally understand the people in the north, or the people who live in Paris think they're the center of the universe, and the people in Marseille are rubes, and it I think being thrown together in a often difficult circumstances forces you to acknowledge that we're kind of in this for the same reasons, and we have the same values mostly. Yeah, I think I found that very valuable. I like the construction business because it's so global. I can talk to a carpenter from Argentina or a carpenter from England, and we all understand how to build with wood. So yeah, it's I don't know. I guess it was my upbringing that probably led me to be interested in the way people in other parts of the world operate, and it continues to be valuable to me.
It's so interesting. I love that you have some servant leadership where you lead in service of others. For those of you who aren't familiar with servant leadership, that is a simple one-liner for what servant leadership looks like, but also that willingness. It sounds like you were really resourceful when it came to being in different countries and learning languages and figuring out that there is a red thread that connects humanity, and we do care a lot about the same things, and there's more unity than there is difference.
Yeah, I had some hard times, where I got mugged and I had no money, and I had to, find work, and I'd raid. I was in southern Spain, so there was plenty of citrus orchards around that I could raid to have something to eat. But yeah, people helped me out, and they didn't have to.
Right.
But generally, people are kind and will help other people who need a hand. And I see it every day in Edmonton. Right.
I love that. Couple of harder hitting questions. You've got those 3 things that were like defining for you. What is a moment of adversity that you were like, wow, that was really hard, and I wouldn't change that I went through it?
I don't really. I think looking back, it doesn't feel like anything's been that hard. I've come through it all. The Army kind of goes out of its way to make life hard for you. I remember coming back from an exercise. We'd been out in the woods for a week or so, tired and filthy, and the minute we got back, we weren't allowed to go back to the barracks and take it easy. We had to clean up all the tents and the weapons, and the tools we used to dig trenches, to all that kind of menial stuff got done immediately. So we finally got that done and got cleaned up and went to the mess and got fed and started drinking. We were young men, so we were drinking a lot, too much probably. And then 3 o'clock in the morning, they roasted us all out of bed. I was still drunk, and most of us were, and sent us back out into the woods. And we had to scramble into our uniforms and grab our kit, and it didn't occur to me at the time, but now, looking back, I see why they made us get everything all cleaned up, because they were going to send us back out. So yeah, God, it's 3 or 4 in the morning. We're driving down a dark road, and suddenly, we get attacked. We get ambushed, so we have to, pile out of the truck, and I mean, this was all, of course, exercise, right? This wasn't
An actual ambush.
This wasn't a war, no. And yeah, so I mean, we got ambushed, and then they threw some tear gas at us. So I don't know if you've ever put on a gas mask, but it's kind of hard to breathe. It kind of reminds me of have you ever done a VO2 max
I've
test?
done one once, yeah.
Yeah,
I got to try on the mask. I didn't have to do the test.
Yeah, it's
that
horrible.
looked awful.
Yeah, and a gas mask is like that too. And mine was brand new, so it really it felt like I stuck my face into a new tire, and
Oh.
I'm getting the waves of nausea, and um, it had just finished raining, so I'm lying in a ditch that's half full of water, and I'm really starting to feel sick. And of course, then I throw up in my gas mask, and I can't really pull it off my face because there's still lots of tear gas around. So yes, that was a dark that was a dark time.
That was not a good day.
No, it's a good story now, right?
It's a great story now, man.
Yeah. And the only thing that made me feel better, and I don't know what this says about me as a person, but there's a guy in my platoon who he was, I don't know, 20 meters or so away from me in the same ditch, and I knew he had hemorrhoids. So he must have been he was hurting worse than me.
Sometimes knowing comparison can be the thief of joy for sure, but also sometimes it can be a source of relief, being like, well,
yes,
my
life
suffering
sucks,
is
but
relative.
doesn't suck as bad as his life.
It's all relative. And that's also like something to remember even in your workforce now, is like, stress is relative. Like, I go into boardrooms and I'm like, this is the worst day of my life. I'm like, but I mean, okay, yeah, it's absolutely stressful. And yes, I have cortisol coursing through my veins, but relative to the experiences of others, it's pretty cushy.
Right?
That boardroom battle wasn't so bad.
When I lived in France, part of the time I was in the south in a town called Bergerac. I don't know if you've ever heard of Cyrano de Bergerac,
I have not.
Very famous play about this very charming guy with a huge nose. Anyway, I recommend it.
Okay.
So that's where he was from, and it was it's a beautiful part of the world. And I got a job on a construction crew, and we were building a big drive-in cooler and freezer at an abattoir, a slaughterhouse. So this was in July, and it was, low or high 20s, low 30s all the time. And this, you can, I don't know, the smells of an abattoir are like a farm times 10. And flies like the Old Testament. Like I've never seen clouds of flies like that before or since. Anyway, I was kind of the young guy on the crew. So these big coolers, you could drive a forklift into them and hang the slabs of beef and pork and whatnot in them. They were made out of these sandwich panels that were stainless steel sheets on the outside and insulation on the inside, and they would tongue and groove together, and then they get fastened with rivets, and we'd build 4 walls and then put the insulated roof panels on top. So one day my job was to crawl up onto the top of those roof panels, and this was inside an existing structure. So the ceiling height, the headroom was, it kind of went from maybe 18 inches to maybe 4 feet. and it was a corrugated metal roof, so it was sweltering up there. It must have been 50 degrees. I could hardly breathe, and it was dusty, and there was lots of bird shit. And yeah, I had to squirt the foam, the spray foam stuff to seal the joints between the panels. And I don't know, I don't think I'd ever been so miserable. You know,
Oh my
kind of
God.
crawling up and down this ceiling and squirting foam between the panels. And then I got sort of to one edge and I could look across a hallway within the plant, and there was a window, and there was a guy inside this little room, and his job was to clean out the cow stomachs. So he had a garden hose going, and he had this rubber outfit on, and you know, he was pulling the poop out of these cow stomachs. He was, you know, shoulder deep in it and
Oh my God.
spraying everywhere. And I thought, I got a great job.
My job
I
is
love
great.
my job now.
Best job of my life.
Yeah.
That is, for those of you who are listening, if you could have seen the contortion my face went through.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh, I can't. You know what? My life has been great. I have no complaints.
So I don't know if those count as formative moments, but they did leave an impression on me.
I think I think when things leave an impression on you, it is formative. And how can it not be? How can it not be even transformational? Because you look at it and you're like, wow, it just kind of grounds you in reality a little bit, like, or at least that current reality and that current experience. And man, oh man, I did not know that's what happened when they clean things out. Yum.
I know. And to this day, I have no idea what they would do with that. Like, I don't know why they wouldn't just toss it in the bin.
But
But
people use tripe, don't they? Like,
yeah, I guess maybe
stuff?
that's what it is.
I don't know.
And cows have what, 6 stomachs or 7 stomachs?
There's not one. There's more than one. That's
Yeah.
all I know. It's like, because they're ruminators.
Ruminators.
I remember the first time I learned what cow cud was. My grandpa also was a farmer or grew up on a farm, and I thought, I love to think that I am more outdoorsy than I am city. And then when I hear stories from the farm and I say, wow, that's a nice lie I've told to myself.
Yeah.
That's a nice lie I've told to myself. I am not. I'd like to be. I'd like to think I could be. I don't know if I can be, though.
Yeah.
That's probably not in the cards. I like my road bike. I like running water. I like central heating. I like that I step onto my backyard and there's no cow patties anywhere.
Right. Yeah.
Or mysterious animals.
Yeah, I know. Mysterious animal byproducts.
Okay, so this is a memory ingrained into my head.
Mm-hmm.
Growing up, we had this huge backyard. We lived in a bungalow. I don't even know when it was built, probably like the 60s or the 70s. And this backyard was just massive. It was, I would say it was like at least 50, 60, 75 feet wide. It was like, I mean, also I was a small child. It might have just felt large, but it felt large. And one year the snow melts and there had been a dog that had gone missing in our neighborhood. And when the snow melts, what was revealed was like a rib cage and a skull that was unquestionably that dog. Unquestionably, at least in my mind, it was unquestionably that dog. I did not do any DNA testing. I cannot confirm it. But I think I was bold enough to pick it up and be like, Dad, what's this? And he's like, put that down. It's loaded in germs. What are you doing? I was like, well, because it's mostly decayed carcass at this time. It's like some dried stuff. Like obviously other animals had gotten to it, like birds or whatever in the winter, like magpies. Well, they're very opportunistic in their consumption. They would have no judgment against that. And so I was like, hey, that's the only time I felt an unexpected specimen in my city living experience. And I think I'm okay with it being the only one ever.
Yeah, clearly left a mark though.
I know exactly where it was in the backyard. I know I was floored. Made me make sure that any animal we ever owned stayed in our four walls.
Okay.
It was not traumatizing, but it was impactful.
Mm.
It was impactful. Okay, well, we're nearing the end, and I want to make sure we touch on some other things before we go through. So you've been through a bunch of different things. Like you've had some of the craziest jobs I've heard. You've made massive moves. You started your own company. You're now the president. Is it the president of IDEA, or is that still you?
No, not anymore. I was the president. I'm still on the board. I'm the chair of the infrastructure committee. So, my interest in the missing middle, hopefully this won't be too long a story, but um, a friend of mine and I tied up a big lot in Glenora. The intention was to build a 12-unit condo for people exactly as I described earlier in our conversation. People who have lived in Glenora all their lives, raised their kids there, and now they, for whatever reason, don't want to have a house anymore, but they want to stay in Glenora. And these were going to be large suites, patterned after the ones that I've seen in Paris and big cities in Germany, with tall ceilings and big windows and beautifully finished. Because I haven't seen anything like that really in Edmonton, and I think people would appreciate it. So I figured Glenora would be tough. I knew it was tough territory for anything infill, and now something multifamily. I was probably looking at a bit of a fight. So during the due diligence period, I arranged a meeting with the president and civics director of the community league. And they said, wow, this is fantastic. We've had all kinds of people in Glenora asking when we're going to get a project like this. So that was a huge relief. The lot was about 300 meters away from a future LRT stop. It was basically at the end of a dead end street, so that the only shadow it would cast would be kind of on a treed area to the north, and then onto the road and to the east, I guess, when the west sun came up. So, I wasn't shading anybody's, tomato patch in their yard. So, it was a solid project. What I found out though from EPCOR was, because I was increasing the density, there was an automatic requirement to increase fire hydrant coverage. And it wasn't completely unexpected, but what I didn't expect was that the water lines in the area were undersized. So in order to get the required amount of water pressure to the hydrant, I had to build a big loop to feed it. So it meant something like 230 meters of water main, which means, digging up all that road and, putting the water main in and connecting it to the hydrant and then fixing all that road. It was going to be about a $700,000 bill, which would have, wiped out about 3/4 of the profit that I was expecting on this building. And so, yes, I wasn't willing to go ahead and do all that work for EPCOR's sake. So yeah, I canceled the land purchase, but it really put a bee in my bonnet, and I found an opportunity to complain to city council, and from there, IDEA got together with EPCOR, and we over the course of a couple of years have created a cost share program for projects like this. The city has acknowledged that we need these missing middle projects. There are infrastructure obstacles that need to be addressed somehow. So yeah, now we've had sort of the preliminary pilot project. EPCOR just embarked on a new sort of funding cycle. They do, basically it's a rate review they do every 4 years or so. So this most recent one, they got $20 million of funding to help out with these sorts of projects. So it's not unlimited. You still have to make an application, and there's a scorecard that your project gets judged on. And there's a few different, there's a half a dozen or so boxes that need to get ticked on the scorecard. But yeah, now it's not fully on the developer to pay for, and this is sort of something that's come out of the infill discussion, right? It wasn't anything anyone had thought about. It wasn't purposely done this way, but we've created policies for greenfield development or high rises, right? So if I'm building a 200 unit building and there's a $700,000 bill, well, maybe I can swing it. Maybe I need to go to 220 units or something, and it doesn't destroy the pro forma. But a 12 unit building, there's just no way.
No, and this kind of initiative allows us, because it serves everyone, because ultimately EPCOR gets the money in a lot of ways because they're going to be serviced. We pay EPCOR for water, hydro, whatever else. But to lay that all on the developer, when what it is not just doing is it's not just serving the developer, it's serving the government, it's serving the community. You've got increased taxpayer density, you've got people who are able to age in place, and you also have more people asking for services that are getting paid for anyways. So why isn't it a cost share program?
Yeah, exactly.
And so I think what a great approach so that a lot of needs get met that maybe were previously disregarded because the bill was just so big.
Yeah, and this is an example of how Edmonton is really in the forefront of figuring these things out, as in the forefront of North America and figuring these things out, right? We've got a city council and a water utility, and EPCOR Electric, it's governed by the province, but they're also engaging with IDEA and with developers. The Canadian Home Builders Association, because we're all pointing out, hey, our city's changing. We need ways to change the infrastructure to accommodate it, and they're at the table with us. They're trying to figure it out with us, and that's pretty cool.
Which is really helpful, especially because you mentioned that one of their goals earlier was that growth by 2044 to be a 2+ million city. 2+ million person city. Okay, so you have that goal, but how are you supporting the people who are helping build that infrastructure, the buildings, the places, and the spaces? How are you working with them? And I think that was news to me in this conversation. So I think that is something to be proud of. Go right. Edmonton. Good job.
Yeah.
I also for those of you who don't live in Edmonton that are listening, Edmonton also has, I believe it's the largest connected green belt in North America. The amount of green space that our river valley occupies, you can go from almost Devon to Edmonton, so the northeast version of Edmonton on a paved trail.
Yeah, actually,
all of it
to Fort Saskatchewan.
Fort Saskatchewan. Right, oh yeah, that's true.
Yeah.
I just didn't go that far. I got tired.
My wife is on the board of the River Valley Alliance, and there's still a few little patches in there that, it's not totally connected, but it's almost there, and it will be, I think in the next couple of years. So yeah, it's extraordinary. It's something like 10 times the size of Central Park.
It's wild.
And here's another little interesting, sorry, I'm nerding out here about,
I love it.
about urban planning, but Edmonton's first municipal development plan was published, I think in 1931 or 1933. And those were simpler times. So we had 11 zones, and they were A, B, C, D, E. They were lettered zones. I mean, today we've got something like 12,000 or some crazy number. It's nuts. So, and it's, we're in the throes of rewriting our zoning bylaws because it's just gotten too complicated and unwieldy. But Zone A, the very first zone in the very first zoning bylaw was the River Valley and Ravine system, and it was enshrined as a park way back then, not to be developed. So, boy, to how many, almost 100 years ago, that same thing was valuable to Edmontonians.
I love that, and it continues, which is, I think, And it also goes back to that when everything is connected and people are connected,
Yeah.
it's just such a powerful thing. One of the reasons I picked the neighborhood I picked is because I can literally get my bike. It takes maybe 10 minutes to cycle to the river valley. And from there, I can cycle to work. So I actually could, if I want, I mean, I don't, because we've had some very inclement weather in the winters, but I can cycle from my house to work mostly in nature, which is wild, given that I live outside of the ring road in
Right.
Edmonton.
Wow.
That's remarkable. Yeah.
Yeah. Good old Edmonton.
So, I mean, obviously I'm a fangirl. I love the river valley so much. It's incredible. Okay. Final takeaways. Anything you want our listeners to walk away from today, having heard from you?
Oh yeah, be proud of Edmonton. If you're a listener who lives in Edmonton, it's a good place, and I think it's underappreciated by the people who live here. Well, it provides opportunities that many other places in the world can't even dream about.
Guys, you heard it here from Mick Graham. Edmonton is cool. Anything else?
That's it. This has been fun.
This has been a lot of fun. Thank you so much for being on the Be Better podcast. Again, Mick Graham joining me today. Is there any way, if our listeners wanted to learn more about you or find you in your professional world, where would they look for you?
Well, I guess you could.
Are you
I
on
don't get.
LinkedIn?
Yeah, I'm on LinkedIn. That's right. It's the
There
only
you go.
social media I really participate in. I think
There you go.
social media is weird. That could be a whole new another podcast. But yeah, I'm on LinkedIn, so that was probably a good spot. Mick Graham.
Excellent. MickGraham, and you can find her there. Thank you so much for joining me today, and I look forward to all the cool urban planning infill stuff you do in the future.
Thanks, Clarissa.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
If this podcast has landed with you, served you, provided value, please let us know. Give us a like, subscribe, share it with a friend that you know it will make a difference for. We are here to be a contribution and a service to others. We cannot wait to see you next time. Thanks again for tuning in. Take care.